about that, what I would like you to do as a first exercise, so David is going to pop you into some breakout groups, and I would like you to have a go. I know this is a difficult exercise online, that's okay, it is designed with that in mind, to have a go at drawing a picture within your group of what groupthink looks like. So if you have not got a clue what groupthink is, I would assume that someone in your group would know what it is. Or if you're not instantly clear, then just give it a go. See what that word seems to mean to you.
Perfect. I think we've got everybody back now, Katie.
Fantastic. So, can we have how many breakout rooms did we have, David? Was it 4?
It was 2 in the end. It was 2.
It was 2. Sorry. So right. So could someone from breakout room 1 show us the picture that got created within your group of what groupthink looks like?
Yeah, I will. Although we wanted to sort of caveat that with, we felt like nominating one person from the group to be the spokesperson was probably not really in the spirit of it. But this is our drawing. It's like 4 little people at the bottom, and then a big thought bubble, and it says our idea.
Okay, great. And when you were creating that, how did the conversation go? Did everyone participate?
If we're going to really be honest, Katie, what happened was I drew this picture before we joined the breakout room. I showed it to people, and they went, "Yeah, great."
And we went along with the idea. And then we thought maybe that was the whole point of a group think, that actually that's not what we were meant to have done. So we discussed the whole thought of what maybe this task was about.
So perfect, you've fallen straight into the trap, which is excellent to see. We'll come back to that. And then group 2, what did you have for your picture?
Should I show mine? Am I on there? So this is our one.
Very similar. Fantastic. Okay, so you've got 4 people again with a shared speech bubble with a tick in it.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you create that? What was the process?
We had a little chat about what we thought groupthink was. Roger Troy put out some pretty ludicrous ideas, and then we decided that he wasn't right. Then we went with what the other chap said, Will, and then we all agreed with Will, and then we all thought that what he said was right, and then we came up with that. I came up with that concept.
Okay, so some bravery that you didn't go with the initial idea, and then everyone clustered around the idea that you had and were happy to go with that as the group's decision on what groupthink was.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll think about that as well as the session is on. We've sort of got 2 different ways that the process is happening there. Interesting that the pictures were so different. So when I went onto Google Images a few months ago, you would get a slightly different search, because obviously everyone gets personalised search results. But these were some of the top images that came up for me when I typed in groupthink. And I think much better than trying to describe what groupthink is, these pictures are a pretty good summary of the process. So the one at the top with everyone's heads all squashed together isn't so different to what you said. The one in the middle, we've got a definition as well. So groupthink is a phenomenon where people tend to confirm with group decisions to avoid feeling outcast, leading to errors in decision making. So groupthink happens, it regularly happens. In some ways it's functional because it allows us to reach a decision more quickly. In other ways it's really problematic because we end up agreeing to things that aren't perhaps the best outcome, because we follow the loudest voices in the room, or we want to conform to what's happening, and a few other reasons that we'll look at in a minute. But you can see from all of these, there can be quite a dark overtone to groupthink. It isn't always the best thing for a group. And so to try and avoid some of those errors in decision making, we need to be very aware of when groupthink is happening and what we might be able to do to counteract it. So when you reflect on the creation of your drawing, where was groupthink in play? I think it would be great to just very quickly go into your breakout rooms again and just have a discussion amongst yourselves of that process. So literally a couple of minutes, we'll make sure we drag you out of the breakout rooms quite quickly. But what you've verbalized that process to me, talk about it amongst yourselves. Who led the decision? Was it genuinely a group decision, or did anyone squash what they thought around how that drawing should be drawn?
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm not going to get you to share again around your reflections on groupthink, because we'll push the session on. But what I do just want to say is that if you think groupthink happens a lot in the face-to-face environment, this session was originally designed just thinking about face-to-face. Coronavirus hadn't happened when we came up with this idea. But if you reflect on the creation of the thing that you've just drawn as a group, you can see, I'm sure, how groupthink can be even more potent when everyone's working from home, because you're multitasking quite often. Then, I mean, in this case, I don't think so. Everyone's very attentive. You're all very good at having your screens on, but lots of sessions that I've run, there's a culture in some companies that you multitask when you're on a Zoom call, and then you find yourself having to agree with a decision that's being made because you weren't really listening. There also aren't as rigid established norms for online decision making. Most companies, most organizations haven't set something like that in place. So how do you go about making decisions when everyone's working online? And then made worse by stuttering technology, people get thrown off of calls, put back on, miss a bit of the chat, and it feels like everything takes forever. And there's a sense of not wanting to slow down the process or to be ostracized. We have a much, much stronger sense of people talking behind our backs and of things being difficult when we're working entirely online than we do when we have some face-to-face interaction. So all of those things aggravate the idea of groupthink. It makes us much more likely to agree in situations where we wouldn't normally do so. So you will have probably in your two groups have described some groupthink happening. You will have agreed to things that you won't have been 100% convinced by. There's a degree to which that's useful. You have to move conversations along. You have to reach agreement at some point. But online, it can be really aggravated. The loudest voices, or the people who are most comfortable with technology, can be the people whose voices are heard literally the loudest in decision making. And so groupthink becomes much more of an issue. And so if we think now, and I'm not just going to talk about the online environment, but I think it's really helpful if you can try and remember to reflect on both things when we're talking. So both what it feels like to be in a decision-making situation when you are physically at your school, also what decision-making situations feel like now when everyone's working remotely. And we've got, as humans, 4 things that make groupthink so much more likely to happen. The first thing is we really want to be liked. We are biologically programmed to want to be part of a group of people and be liked by that group of people. And related to that is a sense that we want to conform. Yes, occasionally we'll rebel, occasionally we'll want to do something a bit different, but as a whole, we want to belong to a group and conform to a group. We also have a decision bias. We want to reach decisions quickly. We want to be able to move forward and have a sense of progress. And the biases in our brain mean that we can regularly convince ourselves of the logic of most decisions. So things like we'll make a decision and then we'll say, oh, well, I did the right thing. That was the right decision. That was the right thing for me. Okay, so all 4 of those things build towards the fact that there is groupthink. Just had a question in the chat about whether we'll get the slides afterwards. Yes, absolutely. I'll share my contact details at the end, so you can also be in touch with me directly, and I will send the slides out via David too. Okay, so all of those things make groupthink much more likely. What I would like you to do now is spend a couple of minutes just individually reflecting, maybe not quite that long, maybe just a minute or so, thinking about what problems could groupthink ultimately cause for teams at your school. We're going to add some meat to this in a minute, but if you can, just jot something down. What do you think for your school, your setting, what problems could groupthink ultimately lead to? Okay, so when we're talking about groupthink, there are 2 elements that are really important. I know there's a lot on this slide, and as I say, I will be sharing these with you because it's probably worth unpacking some of these in more detail. We're going to do that in the rest of the session, but then you have this too that you can return to if you want to reflect on it for your own setting. So groupthink, this idea that we all come to a shared conclusion that isn't necessarily the best one and that we don't all buy into. The consequences of having groupthink, so the direct consequences of groupthink are three major categories. So firstly, it can lead us to think that the group is better than it is. So if we think that the group is invulnerable and if we overestimate how moral it is, then we become a less good group. We're less strong, we're less capable as a group. Groupthink also leads us to be closed-minded. So it makes us justify decisions together and it gets us to stereotype others. So all of those things kind of reiterate the fact that groupthink is happening as well. And groupthink also makes us feel pressure to act the same. So we censor ourselves. That happens, as I was saying, a lot in online interactions, but also face-to-face, we do it so much. I had a socially distanced chat with a friend in my front garden yesterday, and she was saying how, if she's truly honest, she hadn't made up her mind on Brexit until 2 or 3 weeks before the vote, and she just went with what everybody else where we lived said, so she just followed what they said. But she had censored that view because she then saw that it wasn't the right thing to say. So sort of a double act of groupthink. She went with what the group thought, and then she also censored herself from saying anything about how last minute she made her decision. And she also convincing yourself that you agree with other people and being put under direct pressure. All of these things are problems that groupthink creates, and sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then ultimately, groupthink has significant effects on our decision making. So it stops teams who have lots of groupthink looking at all the alternatives and not properly examining risks and opportunities and not thinking sufficiently about objectives. Also, in terms of information, we become much more biased in the information that we engage with. So as a group, when we are subject to groupthink, we start to exclude things that don't fit into the decisions that the group is making. So we become much, much worse at considering alternatives because we're not looking at all the information. And finally, it makes us pretty disastrous at contingency planning because we put the blinkers on and we ignore anything that doesn't conform to what the group has said. So what I would like you to think about now, a bit more reflection, is which of these sources of groupthink do you think affect the leadership team you're a part of? So you've got 9 different sources there. If you were to go down that list, how many of those do you think your leadership team is subject to? If you're feeling brave and you want to share the number in the chat, that would be great, but there's not an expectation that you have to. You can even message me privately and I'll tell everyone the number without you having to admit that it's your number.
I think we've sometimes got number 6 to some extent because people think, well, there's no point being invested and involved in something because they're just making the decisions and I just have to agree to them. So people sort of, lose the motivation because it wasn't what they really wanted to do and they didn't choose to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a common problem, isn't it? That as soon as you feel as though you haven't got a genuine role to play in decision making, you actively withdraw from doing that and your contribution is lost. And so you have the same voices speaking over and over again and shaping decisions. And often management teams say that that's not the case and that everyone has the right to contribute, but the reality can feel very different. Okay, anyone have anything else to say on that? Hopefully you've gone down that list and you've looked at the 9 criteria. I would say that if you have got a number less than 3, you're perhaps not being very honest. I would even maybe say that a number less than 5, you're not being very honest, because I think generally the qualities that make a group good in some ways are also the qualities that lead to groupthink. So being cohesive, for example, that can be really good for other elements of teamwork, but it's a problem for groupthink. And also having a complex environment or being exposed to a high level of risk. The conversations that I've had with school leaders recently, those 2 things are true almost universally. And so you might have made progress in terms of having leadership teams that aren't demographically similar. You might have really good procedures, but you're still likely to face at least 3 or more of those sources of groupthink. It would be hard to find a team that is exempt from groupthink, both because of our human nature and because of the way that teams are set up. Okay, so I am going to push on. This is just a silly little thing that I've got in here, but I think it sort of perfectly sums up what groupthink is and why groupthink has got such a problem. I don't know if anyone recognises that stand-up comedian, that's Stuart Lee, and he lives around the corner from me. You can see from the sign behind me, I live in Stoke Newington too, and he, in one of his most recent stand-up shows, said, "It's all right, I know Brexit won't happen. I was having brunch in Stoke Newington the other day, and absolutely no one is voting for Brexit." You know, of course, we all surround ourselves by these echo chambers of people who think the same as we do. It's the same in terms of whether schools are going to go back or not. I mean, there is just so much in the news at the moment where you can find very, very different perspectives in the press, and depending on what view you subscribe to, you probably read that newspaper and you're probably stuck in one of those echo chambers yourself. That happens in groups, that happens in teams so regularly. We surround ourselves with people who agree with our views, and because of that, it then becomes very hard to find those dissenting views. We have to really go and seek them out. You're very lucky if you're on a leadership team where you've got people with very different and dissenting views. So what can we do then to try to help reduce groupthink? What are the things that can help? You've already had a hint at some of these from thinking about what it is that creates groupthink in the first place. But there are 2 real elements to trying to reduce groupthink. One is encouraging diversity of thought, and the other is encouraging diversity of deed. So making people think differently, programming their brains to get them to have thoughts that are divergent and not to squash those thoughts, but also then getting them to follow through by acting on those thoughts and by doing things that are different to everyone else in the group. So diverse people can definitely help with this. Having people from a wide range of backgrounds and different demographics makes it more likely that you have to do less programming of thought, because people will come to the school with varying perspectives. But even without a diverse group of people working in your leadership team, you can still train yourself to take on diverse perspectives. There are very particular things that can really, really help in this regard. Okay, so there are 6 primary ways that you can think about reducing groupthink. And these link back through to the areas where, which encourage groupthink. So they are trying to reduce those factors, reduce the antecedents that encourage groupthink. The first area is admitting outside voices. So if you have got a very tight-knit leadership team who never invites anyone else into your meetings, or who never encourages people outside your group to give comments, then getting those outside voices to come into the leadership space and share that's fine. So sorry, where did you catch me to?
It was, we lost you for about 20 seconds, Katie.
Okay, so I was talking about admitting outside voices, so giving others the opportunity to give comments and thinking about rotating team membership. So that happens quite frequently. now, that the more you can do that, the more you can invite people into your team on a temporary basis or in an honorary position, can really help. Secondly, encouraging discussion and disagreement. So rather than trying to squash that, actually thanking one another's divergence. It can feel very, very clunky when you first start to do that. So it can feel uncomfortable to say, thanks so much for disagreeing with me. But there are ways that you can build that into your talk that don't seem clunky, and I like you. So saying, yeah, it's really good to hear a different view on this. Encourages people to share those views because you're giving permission. And setting boundaries can also be very helpful. So saying that there has to be a certain level of discussion and disagreement. We will discuss this contentious issue for half an hour, for exactly half an hour. In that time, we expect everyone to express, play devil's advocate in some way on this issue. And thirdly, having respect. So, you know, that's part and parcel of thanking one another for being different, but also giving people the respect to allow their views to come through. Thirdly, having rigorous processes which govern decision making and decision taking. So it's not ad hoc. You know how you make decisions and how you take decisions, and that process is followed. And then you can build into that process things like admitting outside voices and encouraging discussion and disagreement. It makes it more robust. Fourthly, increasing team diversity. So here you can look for opportunities. So if you have got people who are demographically different, the advice now has very much have less dialogue about difference, and the diversity of their staff isn't fully exploited in the way that it could be and should be. So encouraging that dialogue about difference. I don't know if anyone used to watch Mad Men, but in that all of the creative ad makers were men for a long time, and then one of the leading characters was a woman, and she became an ad creator, and they did amazing campaigns for all kinds of women's products. So that's an example of sort of not being colourblind, not being background blind, not ignoring people's demographics. Also, avoiding we-click feelings in recruitment and team membership decisions. I mean, you could say so much about recruitment, and I'm sure many of you are aware of some of the stuff that's written on this already. If you're not, please definitely get in touch with me, because there is a lot out there to be said for trying to get rid of the bias in your recruitment, intentional, unintentional, normally unintentional, and making sure that you are recruiting the best person for the job. We'd be very, very bad at spotting whether we've actually got the best person for the job if we're left our own gut instincts. Okay, then recognising times when good quality thinking might be difficult. So if you're in a team, and you know this is really resonating with where we are now, that is in a high stress situation where there are high levels of complexity, where there have been recent failures or hiccups or significant issues, quality thinking is so much more difficult in that situation. And I'm sure if you reflect on your own experiences last 8 to 10 weeks, you will have seen that in many ways your decision making, the quality of your decisions, it's much harder to make a good decision as a team. So recognizing it's going to be more difficult, in those cases ramping up the processes that are governing your decision making and decision taking, really giving yourself time to think through things that are important. And then finally, naming. So naming these things when they happen in your team can be very helpful. Is there a moral dilemma that everyone's trying to paper over, but do you need to talk about this moral dilemma where you sit in different positions in your group on it? Do you need to name fear that you're feeling about taking this decision or about speaking out? And do you need to reflect on the lack of certainty that you're feeling at the moment? So all of those things are critical. What we're going to think about now is how can you go about doing these things? Now, I think there would be value in breaking into subgroups to do this. But I'm not sure whether the current breakout rooms have perhaps got a few too many people in. We might be better in groups of 3 or 4. David, is that going to be incredibly challenging, or is that okay?
I think I might be up to the job. I think I might
Excellent.
be able to do that.
Okay, so have we got everyone back?
Everyone's back now, Katie, yes?
Brilliant. What it might be nice to do is just a couple of minutes to give you the chance. Does anyone want to share any of the thoughts, or have they got any questions around what we're discussing in your smaller groups?
Yes, hello. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Hi. I just I said to my group, but I'll also say it here, that I have slightly different perspective, because although I've previously been in school, I'm now a consultant. And so when I go into schools, and through this period, I've been like helping lots and lots of schools with their transition to remote learning. But through that, I've had this insight into their organisation. And I know we've spoken about it, but I've been able to pick out things that are really not working, and then had to go to senior leadership teams and say, do you want this feedback, as we've spoken about? But I suppose what we're thinking about here, and I said this to my breakout room, is there's so many advantages to being external. To be able to deliver that message in a different way than how it would come internally. So I can be quite blunt about what I've found. I can be quite honest. I can be quite open, because for me, it's very low stake. They don't have to take my opinion. They don't have to action it. They don't have to listen to it. And also, it doesn't have any impact on me as my position there. Like, my time will end with that school, and then that's fine. So what you're trying to do is trying to get that external voice, but to build it into your internal team, so that you feel comfortable hearing that kind of honesty and frank discussion through mechanisms that you put into meetings, for examples, or agendas, or general discourse or dialogue that you have. But allowing yourself to feel comfortable hearing that kind of external voice, I say in inverted commas, but from somebody internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is quite a good framework in which to think about how to get internal voices to be brave enough to talk, is that you ask the actors consultant on a particular issue and say that you want to hear the unfettered truth. But then, of course, as a senior leadership, have to follow through on being able to deal with those messages. Another way that I've heard that talked about is a court jester. So back in the day when kings and queens used to have jesters, the role of the jester was to tell the truth in a jokey way, and they were the only people who could challenge the authority of the king and the queen through their joking style. So positioning people who are prepared to take on that jesterish role. I'm not saying with necessarily with a sense of humour, but giving permission to challenge the authority is very helpful for a senior leadership team. Obviously, it requires confidence, though, on both parts, from the senior leaders and from the person who's acting in that role. Does anyone else have anything to add on this just before we wrap up? We've got a couple of minutes. Totally fine if not. I just want everyone to feel like they've had the opportunity to speak. Okay, fine. So what I then want to show you is this, which will be in the slide that you get sent. This is all the work that psychologists and organisational theorists have done looking at what groupthink is. And what I've shared with you today is the headlines of this reach. If you wanted to get really into the detail, this is the detail. This is here are all the things that lead to groupthink. Here are all the things that groupthink then creates. So where you've got this idea of these 6 different units, and where I've given you these questions, it's all based on the detailed psychological research that has been done around groupthink. It's just in there because it adds it adds a level of sort of rigor to what you're talking about. You can see that what we've discussed comes from a strong psychological foundation. Okay, so any questions before we round up? I'm going to take that probably as a no. I'll sort of count down from 10 in my head and then assume that we're all good. So yeah, so we're done for today. Please do be in touch if you want any more information. I obviously run leadership coaching sessions, train leaders and teams, do team coaching and do leadership consultancy and planning, working with a range of clients across sectors, including schools. And you can find out more about me at my LinkedIn profile or drop me an email or have a look on my website. I also have a monthly newsletter that I put out with one article that I write related to leadership and then a few other useful bits and pieces. So if you want to be added to my mailing list, then feel free to share your details privately in the chat or let me know via email or let me know via David. I think that's it from me. So thanks everyone so much for taking part. I hope to speak to some of you soon.